It is the end of the year, which means it's book wrap-up season. I love book wrap-up season. I love looking back at what I read, but I read some good books this year. Like looking back at my Goodreads, I realized I think I had a handful of 2 stars, 1 star, and a lot of 4 5-star range books. Like I really knocked it out of the park this year. And so I did the difficult task of picking 10 books that I would mark as my favorites from the years, which was really difficult because I read so many good ones, but we're gonna get into it. Here's a sneak peek at some of them. First up, if you have spent any time with me since May, I have talked about this book, and it is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This book, absolutely incredible. It is actually a collection of essays. He says it's essays on the human-centered planet. And how he formats this book is he picks a topic and he writes an essay that's like 6 to 10 pages long about it, weaving in his personal experience as well as background on the topic. And it could be on Monopoly, Canada geese, Googling people. Like he picks random topics and he gives you all this information about it wrapped up in stories about his life. But it all really came together with this sense of hope about humanity. And so reading these, I felt so hopeful about my place in the world when I read this book. And I read these where I would do a couple at a time every morning, really set the tone. It made me want to be more creative. It made me want to be a better human. It made me care about the planet. Like it was so hopeful. I underlined so many things, but if I was gonna say like one thing you need to read, it would be this book, just because of how hopeful it made me feel. And if you're creative, I also think this is really useful. I think it's very inspiring. 10 out of 10. John Green, love you for this. This is probably gonna be one of my favorite books of all time, period. Like I read this in May and said, yeah, this is going on my favorites list. And I've been rereading it at the end of the year just because it sets a really good tone for me in the morning. Would recommend. The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This was the second Ashley Poston book that I ever read, and it is just so cute and clever, and it made me feel warm inside. And it's about this girl, she inherits her aunt's apartment, but the apartment has like a time travel element to it where sometimes it'll send you back in time 7 years. And so she goes back in time 7 years, falls in love with someone, but doesn't know where he is in the present day. It is really uniquely done, really interesting. And like I said, it just made me feel very warm inside. She delves into grief and what that looks like, and I think she did a really good job on it. And it's just a really, really lovely story. I can't wait to read more from her in 2025. This was one of my favorite fantasies I read all year. It is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. Don't know if I said it right, but I tried. This book, fantastic. So earlier this year, I read a book that on the cover literally said like, it's like Pirates of the Caribbean. And like Pirates of the Caribbean is one of my favorite franchises of all time. And so I read it. I was very disappointed. It was nothing. It did not give the energy of Pirates of the Caribbean at all. And so I asked TikTok and was like, hey, does anybody have a book suggestion that has like pirates and like will give me the same energy as that franchise and as Keira Knightley did? Like, come on. And this was one of the books that someone suggested to me. And let me tell you, fantastic. So in this book, Amina Al-Sirafi is a retired pirate. She used to be a pirate captain and she sailed the seas, all that jazz. But now she's retired. She has a kid. She's living in the middle of nowhere. Take me out of sight, yada, yada. And someone comes to her and is like, one more job. I need you for one more job, and then you can retire with your family and your family will be safe. And so she decides to go out. She gets her old crew. They do this one more job. And obviously it doesn't go as planned. But absolutely fantastic. Like it's not like Pirates of the Caribbean in any way, but the energy of like a strong female pirate character that Keira Knightley brought to the table kind of gets some similar feels here. And like you can tell that Shannon did so much research on this, like it feels so well done, and the voice of the character, incredible. You've got swashbuckling, you've got fights, you've got sea monsters, demons, like crazy stuff, but so good. And it ends in a way that like I felt very satisfied, even though there's a second book that's not out yet, so there's going to be more story, but it ended in a very complete way, which I really appreciate. And also, this is not a European story. My geography is suffering at the moment. This is in the Indian Ocean. There we go. So all this happens in the Indian Ocean, and so it's not like a white story.
A white man? No!
Which is nice. I'm trying to broaden my fantasy horizons out of European contexts, and this was great. Also, the cover is gorgeous, but by far one of my favorite fantasies I read this year. I cannot wait to read more from this author next year, but genuinely fantastic, and it did fill the void that Pirates of the Caribbean made in my life. Next up, we are going to talk about Emily Henry. I have 2 of her books on this list. First, we're going to talk about Funny Story, because Funny Story came out this year. I actually got to go to like a midnight release party for it, and I won a signed copy for having a very big personality, which was crazy. I didn't see it coming. I just suddenly was in front of everybody and being fun. And then I got a book, and it was great. I love this. Like it is no secret that I love Emily Henry. And the thing that Emily Henry does so well is that her love stories aren't just about the love interest. Like, yes, her main character falls in love, but her main characters also learn how to be a good friend. They learn what it means to be in community. Like, they learn how to deal with their grief. Like, there's so many layers to her stories, and both you and the characters are better at the end for having known each other. And I don't know how she does it. Every protagonist, I'm like, did you take a page from my diary? Why do I relate so heavily to you? Why do I want to cry? She's just incredible. And this one, I was intrigued because the love interest, Miles, was kind of described as a stoner who wears Crocs. And I was like, I don't think that's my vibe. But boy, oh boy, is he fantastic. And so this one, the idea is that like Daphne, the main character, she's engaged to this guy, Peter, and he dumps her for his female best friend like weeks before the wedding. And then she ends up moving in with Peter's female best friend's boyfriend, who she also dumped. And then chaos ensues. And it literally felt like when someone hands you a warm cinnamon roll. That is the best way to describe this book. And my favorite thing about it is that Daphne has to learn what it means to be a part of a community. Community looks like going to the same coffee shop every day until the barista knows your name and you know the barista's name. Community looks like showing up for your friends. Community looks like being willing to be vulnerable. And her experience with learning that and like coming to a place where she's like, oh no, I actually belong to this place, mirrored my experience with that over the last 3-4 years. And I just loved it. Emily Henry legitimately never misses. Like every single book, I'm like, damn girl, yes, you get me. And there's just so many sweet moments that just made me feel so warm inside. That's really the best descriptor of this book, is I felt warm inside reading it. 10 out of 10. And I will forgive Miles for loving Crocs. In the same gist, Emily Henry, Beach Read. This is not the first time that I read it. I read this last year for the first time when I did my first round of Emily Henry reads, but I listened to it on audiobook. And it just didn't hit the way, it just like didn't hit that first time. I was like, it's good, but like whatever. And I read this physical form this year and I wanted to cry. It was so good. And this book really deals with grief and loss in a really beautiful way, but in a way that feels really, really true. I know what it feels like to walk through grief after losing someone that you love, and she gives a really good and accurate portrayal of what that looks like and what it means to be angry about it, which I don't think every book that has grief really shows how angry you can be about that situation and what it feels like to not have that person there to have those feelings about. This one is about a girl named January and a guy named Augustus Everett. And January, her dad just died, and he left her his house on the beach. And so she goes there because she's broke, she's been broken up with, she needs to get her book written. And so she goes there, but just finds out that her college nemesis is living next door. And so they put forth a bet to see if they can swap genres, because she's having writing block, swap genres and see if someone can get published writing the other person's genre. It's really, really good. It's beautifully done. It's heart-wrenching. I will say, death of a parent is dealt with in this, so if that is a trigger for you, maybe not the best book, but I will say it is beautifully, beautifully done. And reading this a second time brought it up to the top of my Emily Henry list. Like, I loved it so much. Emily Henry can do no wrong, in my opinion. I love her so much. Next up, one of my favorite authors, V.E. Schwab, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I love V.E. Schwab. I have an entire section of my shelf dedicated to V.E. Schwab, and I am telling you, every single book I've ever read from her is an absolute banger. The plots that she, like concepts that she comes up with every time, I'm like, girl, how did you do that? Like, how did you put all those ideas together? What? And this one is about a girl named Adeline, or Addie LaRue, who in the 1700s was about to be married off, and she didn't want to be married, so she prayed to the gods to help her, and the devil basically shows up and makes a deal with her. And as you know, if you make deals, you got to get your wording right, otherwise you're going to get what you wanted, but not really. And basically what she got was she didn't have to get married. She gets to live forever, but everyone has forgotten her. And no one remembers her name. She can't say her name to anybody. And the moment that she walks out of her room, the people forget who she is. And so she lives forever, but no one knows who she is. And so this is not really a time travel story, but it is a story that deals with time. So it's like it starts in 1714, but you get timelines all the way up to like 2019. It is so interestingly done. And the way that she talks about like identity and who you are. And Adeline is just such an interesting protagonist. And she's scrappy and she is stubborn. And she is so, I don't know. I really enjoyed her. And I want to read it again because I listened to it the first time. I want to physically read it in 2025. It's just so beautifully done. And V.E. Schwab is another one that I'm like, girl, have you ever missed? The answer so far is no. I think I'm 6 books of hers in, and she hasn't missed yet. 10 out of 10 would recommend. This book has had nothing but rave reviews. Very few people don't like it, honestly. It's a little bit of a slower story, but so beautifully done. And also you get to see a lot of different times of history, which I think is interesting. It kind of has that historical aspect to it. And also like this is fantasy, but it's a very accessible fantasy. Like my mom read this and she doesn't like fantasy at all, and she still enjoyed it. So even if you're like, oh, I'm not really a fantasy girly, I still think you would really, really like this. Next up, Carrie Soto is back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I ate this book up. This book is about a tennis star named Carrie Soto, and she, by time she retires, she's pretty much the best tennis player anyone has ever seen. She's won the most. She's at the top of her game. Incredible. Well, 6 years after her retirement, someone else comes up and beats her record. So she decides to come out of retirement in order to prove that she still has it, which is crazy. Like if you've ever seen tennis, that is a hard sport. It's rough on your body. That's hard after 6 years of not playing to come back and then do it. And so this is all, it goes back and forth from like when she is a kid getting into tennis, and all the way up to that last competition that she does. The voice of this, like, you knew who Carrie Soto was just from hearing her talk in the first chapter. Like, Taylor really captured such a strong voice for this character, and I loved it. And Carrie Soto, she's not very likable, but she is compelling. And it really like brings into that mind of, is it possible to be the best of the best without being obsessed? And the answer is no. And like that idea of being the best of the best at the expense of other things in your life, and learning to let go and how to be a person and how to make winning not your whole personality. Like, it's so good. And Taylor Jenkins Reid, like, she's another one that come 2025, I'm going to be reading through her whole catalog just because of how much I loved this book. Fantastic. Like, this made me care about tennis. Like, I finished this book and then went and was like, when is the US Open? I must watch. That is how much I love this book. And I don't know anything about tennis, and it was still understandable to me. That's also really important. It is a book about tennis, but it's not over my head tennis, and it made me want to care about tennis. I loved it so much. All right, my next few books I do not actually have physically because I got them from the library. Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cáñas. This book is technically a horror. It is categorized like historical horror. I am not a horror girly. Let's be so clear. Not a horror girly, ain't about it. This book was fantastic, but it's hilarious because I don't even remember putting it on my hold list. Like, I don't even know why I would have put it on my holds because it is a horror, other than the fact that the cover is gorgeous. Fantastic. Okay, so this is set in like the Texas-Mexico border in the 1840s. And so the main character is Nena, and she's the daughter of a rancher. And when she was a kid, like, she fell in love with a boy who was like a worker on site. And it's been many years. He's gone missing. Like, she has a near-death experience as a kid. He disappears and she doesn't know why. He never came back. And then it circles back to present day where he comes home because Americans are coming in to conquer their area, and he comes in to fight. And then they have like a, why are you back? Why did you leave? type situation. But on top of white men coming in to steal their land, there's also this supernatural something that is attacking their people that they can't figure out. And so they have to figure that out. So it's a romance, it's a horror, it's historical fiction, supernatural, fantastic. And now, like I said, I don't really do horror. A lot of horror really is either very, in my experience, is very gory, or it goes very supernatural, demons, devils, and stuff like that, and that just stresses me out. And this doesn't really do that. This felt a lot closer to fantasy, and I felt like it was horror in the same way that the movie A Quiet Place is horror. Like, technically, there are elements there, but it's not full-fledged, you know? Honestly, I felt like I've read some scarier fantasies. But the story was really interesting. I felt like I learned a lot about history. I thought the writing was really good in the setting. Like, she really was very atmospheric and very interesting, and bringing in that idea of like, who truly is the horror element. Is it the white man or is it the vampires? Who knows? But it was fantastic. There's also that little bit of romance in there. I loved it. Even if you're not a horror girly, I would recommend. My next one is a mystery, and that is The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz. This one is a like Sherlock Holmes-esque story, but the main character is a writer, and this detective that's kind of known for being kind of Sherlock-esque and like, how in the world did you solve that? But no one likes him. Comes in and is like, hi, I need you to write a book about me. And the writer's like, why? He's like, well, I need money, and also I know it's a good one. And so they end up partnering, and the writer, Anthony, like follows him around, and they solve a case, and he's writing all of his observations about the cop and all that jazz, or the detective. And the most interesting thing about this, like, the case was good. I didn't guess who it was. very fantastic. It never gets like gory or in a way that I'm like, I didn't need to know all that information. But the most interesting thing about this is that the author, Anthony Horowitz, inserts himself. Like, he is the writer in the story. And so he uses pieces of his own life, from working on movies to doing this, in the story. So it feels very real. Like, I literally had to stop in the middle and Google if this was a true story or fiction. And it's fiction. He just self-inserted himself into the story. Very interesting, something I've never really seen to that caliber before, and it was done so well. And I loved every second of it, and the cover is gorgeous, and big fan. Big fan. I loved how he did that. I don't know how he came up with the idea, but it also was nice because he has worked in television, he's written a ton of stuff, and so you got to see a lot of back end of what writing takes, which was fun, and I enjoyed that. Okie dokie, we have made it to my last book on the list, which is technically a trilogy, and it is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. I finally gave in after a year since the first person told me to read it. I finally gave in and read these books, and I must say, y'all hyped this the exact right amount. Like, a lot of times you see something on the internet and people are like, this is the best thing I've ever read, and then you read it and you're like, I don't know what you've been reading because this was trash. Like, that was not this experience. This entire book, these 3 books, fantastic. Some of the best fantasy work that I have encountered in a very long time. And these books are big. Like, not as big as some of his other stuff, but like, they're big books. And a risk of a book that's really large in a fantasy thing is that there would be times where you're like, okie dokie, please get to the point. I never felt that. The whole time I was like, all of this is vital to the plot. He had twists and turns that I didn't see coming. He had a young female protagonist, and he didn't make it weird. So many men writing fantasy, when they write young girls in fantasy, it feels gross. That didn't happen. I mean, you could tell it was a man who wrote it, but like, not in a negative way, you know? Also, in fantasy, it's really easy to lose track of characters. And even though he had a lot of characters, he named them in a way that was distinct enough to be interesting, but not so distinct that I'm like, I don't remember your name because it's so weird. Like, he named them in a way that was very distinct. Like, I knew who all these characters were, which is a feat in and of itself in fantasy. And also the plot, like, kept me locked in the whole time. I think the 3rd book was my favorite. I realized I didn't tell you anything about this series, but all you need to know is that it was so good. And the narrator for these, some of the best narration work that I have encountered in my life. And I am an audiobook girly, like, I am qualified to say that. Some of the best narration work. The narrator was able to give everyone a distinct and separate voice without it feeling like too much. And a lot of time, male narrators in fantasy spaces, when they narrate for women, is like, what are you doing? That is not how a woman sounds. Like, it sounds terrible. Didn't do that. Fantastic. I honestly can't rave about this series enough. And also, I would like to have a chat with Brandon and ask him how the hell is he plotting these things? Because he has books that, if you listen to them, are 62 hours long. I went to go pick up one of these books the other day. They're all this big. Why are they this big? What do you have to say? But the thing is, after reading this, I truly believe he does have that much to say. But I want to know, how in the world is he keeping all of these plot points together? How is he plotting this book? I need to know. That's crazy. I'm not going to tell you anything about the story, but because I've raved enough about it. Fantastic. I loved every single second of it. 10 out of 10. I can't wait to read more of him. I'm taking a break because the end of the year is too stressful for me to try and take on a fantasy, but I have several of his other books and I'm about to get into it. Big fan. Must say, y'all did not overhype that, which is a pleasant surprise because a lot of the things the internet hypes up, I am disappointed in. I had a few letdowns this year, and it is y'all's fault. But yeah, those are my top 10. I read so many good books this year, y'all, and I loved it so much. I love books, and I can't wait. 2025 is gonna be even better. I'm gonna read even more good books, and it's incredible. I have so much to read, and it's beautiful.